Welcome to Anime What If Saga, where anime worlds take darker paths, and every choice has consequences. This is a Jujutsu Kaisen what if story. The world didn't celebrate independence. It regulated it. 3 weeks after the Industrial District incident, an emergency summit was called. Not by Jujutsu headquarters, by governments. They didn't call Gojo Satoru a weapon. They called him a strategic asset. Closed-door meetings filled with language carefully chosen to sound neutral. Risk mitigation, global stability, containment through cooperation. No one said control. Everyone meant it. Gojo was invited, not summoned. That distinction mattered. He arrived late on purpose. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. The room went silent the moment he stepped in. Presidents, prime ministers, defense heads, people used to commanding armies. None of them could look him in the eye for long. We appreciate your restraint, one leader began. The recent events proved humanity can respond independently. Gojo tilted his head slightly. Some of them can, he replied. Silence. Another official continued. But we need structure. Predictability. Gojo smiled faintly. You're afraid of me, he said. No one denied it. They proposed oversight. Not limits on power. Limits on action. Gojo would not intervene unless a threshold casualty number was reached. Authorization was granted. Multiple response systems failed. In short, he would be the last resort. Yuji heard about the proposal later. That's insane, he said. You're not a button. Gojo laughed quietly. That's exactly what they want. Gojo didn't reject the proposal. That terrified everyone. He asked one question. If I refuse authorization, and people die, who takes responsibility? No one answered. So Gojo answered for them. I will. The agreement passed. Not unanimously. Relieved. From that day forward, Gojo Satoru was no longer a sorcerer. He was a pillar. The curse ecosystem noticed immediately. Not fear. Not resistance. Opportunity. Curses began acting differently. Not stronger. Smarter. They appeared just below response thresholds. Just enough chaos to cause damage. Not enough to justify Gojo's arrival. Local teams were stretched thin. Governments insisted on protocol. Authorization delays became deadly. Gojo watched it unfold. He could see every flaw. Every death that didn't need to happen. And he didn't move. Not because he agreed. Because this was the cost of restraint. Yuji confronted him again. You're letting them bleed, Yuji said. Gojo looked at him calmly. They asked for this. Yuji clenched his fists. And you said yes. Gojo nodded. So they can't pretend anymore. The first major failure came overseas. A coastal city hit by layered curse activity. Response teams overwhelmed. Authorization stalled by bureaucracy. Gojo waited. The threshold wasn't met. When approval finally came, Gojo arrived. The city survived. Barely. The report listed 112 dead, thousands displaced, zero strategic justification. The world blamed systems. Not Gojo. Not yet. Kenjaku smiled. They've made him human again, he whispered. And humans are easier to manipulate. The second failure was worse. A nation refused authorization. Political pride. Fear of dependency. They chose to handle it alone. The curse outbreak spiraled. By the time Gojo arrived, invited too late, the damage was irreversible. Gojo stood in the ruins. Wind carrying ash through empty streets. This is what you wanted, he whispered. Not angrily. Truthfully. The public narrative shifted again. Not hatred. Expectation. Why didn't Gojo override the system? Is he choosing rules over lives? Does power excuse obedience? Gojo felt it then. The final shape of the trap. If he obeyed, he was complicit. If he disobeyed, he became a tyrant. There was no neutral ground. Jujutsu headquarters fractured internally. Some wanted Gojo unleashed again. Others wanted firmer control. Kenjaku didn't rush. This stage required patience. He prepared something new. Not a curse. Not a plan to defeat Gojo. A crisis designed to force choice. One where Gojo would have to decide whether to save the world or break it. Gojo stood alone that night, blindfold off, 6 eyes burning. I wanted them to grow, he murmured. A pause. I didn't realize growth hurts this much. Below him, the curse network pulsed. Not rising, not falling, waiting. Because pillars don't get to move freely. They either hold everything up, or collapse and take the structure with them. The denial wasn't an accident. That was the moment Gojo understood everything. A large-scale curse manifestation erupted in a border city. Not subtle, not controlled. A layered outbreak, multiple nodes feeding into each other, spreading fear across neighborhoods like infection. Any sorcerer could see it. This wasn't survivable without him. Gojo stood ready. Authorization request sent. He waited. And waited. The response came 27 minutes later. Denied. No explanation. No counterplan. Just a digital stamp and silence. Yuji stared at the screen. They can't be serious. Gojo didn't react. He was already looking elsewhere. At the city. At the people running. At the fear rising fast enough to tear holes in reality. They're testing me, Gojo said calmly. Yuji's voice shook. With lives. Gojo nodded once. The government released a statement minutes later. We are confident in our independent response capabilities. Confident. Local forces engaged. Bravely. Desperately. Ineffectively. Gojo watched the casualty count rise. Not because he couldn't intervene. Because he was forbidden to. The curses adapted quickly. They learned response patterns. They learned evacuation routes. They learned delay. Kenjaku watched from far away, fingers steepled. Excellent, he whispered. They've turned restraint into leverage. The city burned. Not dramatically. Gradually. When authorization finally came, it wasn't approval. It was surrender. Gojo arrived too late to save the city. But early enough to stop the spread. He hovered above ruins where streets used to be. Thousands dead. Tens of thousands displaced. All preventable. The officials met him afterward. Grim-faced. Grateful. Unapologetic. You proved why restraint matters, one said. Gojo turned slowly. How? If you'd arrived earlier, the official continued. We'd still be dependent. Gojo stared at him. And for the first time, his smile vanished completely. That wasn't independence, Gojo said softly. That was sacrifice. The official didn't deny it. The news cycle twisted reality overnight. Headlines read, Gojo respects sovereignty. World stands on its own. Tragic but necessary losses. Public grief was redirected. Not toward leaders. Toward Gojo's hesitation. Social feeds flooded with questions. Why didn't he disobey? Isn't power meant to be used? Who decides when Gojo acts? Gojo felt the pressure shift. Not anger. Expectation sharpening into command. Back at Jujutsu headquarters, fractures widened. Some sorcerers demanded Gojo ignore authorization. Others warned that doing so would trigger global retaliation. Retaliation. Yuji snapped. Against him. Gojo answered quietly. Against everyone around me. Kenjaku smiled again. They're building the frame, he said. Now they'll paint him as the threat. The next incident was smaller. More surgical. A curse appeared inside a refugee zone. Low grade. Fast. Children present. Authorization was delayed deliberately. Internal communications later proved it. A test. Gojo arrived the moment approval came. 7 minutes too late. The footage leaked. Not of the curse. Of Gojo standing still as medics worked around him. The comments were vicious. He watched again. He chooses rules. He's not a savior. Gojo turned his phone off. Not because he was hurt. Because he was thinking. They're forcing me into a shape, he murmured. Yuji looked at him. What shape? Gojo met his eyes. A tyrant if I act. A monster if I don't. Kenjaku prepared the next phase. This one wasn't about denial. It was about invitation. A coalition approached Gojo privately. Not with threats. With reassurance. We'll give you full authority, they said. No delays. No denials. A pause. But only under our command structure. Gojo laughed. Not loudly. Not kindly. You don't want protection, he said. You want ownership. They didn't argue. Gojo walked away from the meeting alone. The city below pulsed with life and fear. I wanted them to grow, he whispered again. A pause. But they're learning how to hide behind systems. And how to blame me for them. Above the city, cursed energy twisted. Not escalating. Waiting for the decision. Because the world had learned something dangerous. If Gojo obeyed, he could be used. If Gojo disobeyed, he could be condemned. And the strongest sorcerer alive was running out of places to stand. The crisis was too perfect. That was the first sign. A massive curse formation appeared in a metropolitan center. Not sudden, not chaotic, engineered. Fear levels rose in carefully measured waves. Enough to trigger manifestation, not enough to cause immediate collapse. The city was full. Hospitals, schools, transit hubs. Authorization requests flooded in instantly. Gojo didn't wait this time. He knew what this was. He moved. Without approval. The moment he arrived, the curse network reacted violently. Not resisting. Signaling. Gojo erased the primary manifestation in seconds. Secondary nodes collapsed immediately. Thousands of lives saved. Millions spared panic. The crowd cheered. For less than an hour. Then the broadcasts began. Gojo Satoru violates international protocol. Unilateral intervention sparks global alarm. Who controls the strongest man alive? The narrative shifted faster than cursed energy ever could. Governments issued statements. Condemnations framed as concern. We cannot allow unchecked power. Today it was curses. Tomorrow it could be politics. Gojo watched it unfold from above the city. Calm. Almost relieved. They were waiting for this, he said quietly. Yuji stared at the screens. You saved them. Gojo nodded. That's not what this was about. Emergency summits were called. Coalitions formed. Not to fight Gojo. To contain his influence. Jujutsu headquarters received an official directive. Gojo Satoru was to be restricted pending review. Yuji laughed bitterly. Restricted how? Gojo answered calmly. By everyone around me. Sorcerers were ordered not to assist him. Transportation networks denied access. Barriers subtly altered to resist his presence. Not to stop him. To slow him down. Kenjaku watched the reactions with satisfaction. He acted, he murmured. Now they have permission to fear him. The next curse outbreak proved it. Gojo arrived immediately. Local authorities ordered evacuation. But response teams were delayed. On purpose. Gojo could still erase the curse. But the collateral would be immense without coordination. He waited. And people died. The news cycle didn't blame the delays. They blamed his hesitation. Why didn't he act immediately? He broke protocol before, why not now? Is he choosing when to be a hero? Gojo closed his eyes. They wanted inconsistency. So they could call him unstable. At headquarters, the elders turned openly hostile. You've endangered the balance, one said. Gojo replied quietly. You built a balance that requires blood. That night, a classified report leaked. Fabricated. Carefully edited. It showed projected scenarios of Gojo's unchecked intervention. Cities destroyed. Governments collapsed. Humanity ruled by a single sorcerer. The public reacted exactly as planned. Fear turned personal. Protests erupted. Not against curses. Against Gojo Satoru. Gojo out. No gods. Power needs chains. Gojo walked past one protest alone. No blindfold. No infinity. Just a tall man in a coat. Someone threw a stone. It bounced harmlessly away. Gojo didn't flinch. But something inside him cracked. Kenjaku stepped out of the shadows that night. Not to fight. To speak. You see it now, he said softly. Gojo didn't turn. I've always seen it, Gojo replied. Kenjaku smiled. Then you know what comes next. Gojo faced him at last. You're enjoying this. Kenjaku nodded. Because you finally understand. Strength without consent, Kenjaku continued, is called tyranny. And consent without strength, Gojo replied, is called sacrifice. Kenjaku laughed. The world will choose, he said. And the world already had. An international declaration was issued at dawn. Gojo Satoru is hereby designated a global anomalous threat pending compliance review. Not an enemy. Not a criminal. Something worse. A problem. Gojo read the declaration once. Then folded it carefully. So this is the shape, he murmured. Yuji looked at him. What do you do now? Gojo looked out at the waking city. Sirens in the distance. Fear humming softly in the air. I stop being a pillar, he said. A pause. And become a fault line. Far below, cursed energy surged. Not exploding. Aligning. Because when a system labels balance itself as a threat, collapse is no longer an accident. Gojo Satoru did not run. That was the first mistake everyone made. When the declaration went live, governments expected disappearance, isolation, silence, retreat. Instead, Gojo stayed exactly where he was. No blindfold, no infinity flaring, no display of dominance, just presence. Jujutsu headquarters went into panic mode. He's not complying. He's not resisting either. What does that mean? No one answered. Because Gojo had stepped into a space outside protocol. He stopped responding to authorization requests entirely. Not denying them, ignoring them. Curses still appeared. Sometimes Gojo intervened. Sometimes he didn't. No pattern. No warning. That uncertainty terrified everyone more than constant intervention ever had. Sorcerers were forced to decide for themselves again. Not because Gojo told them to. Because they had no choice. Megumi noticed it first. This isn't rebellion, he said quietly. This is abdication. Yuji frowned. From what? Megumi looked up. From being their solution. Kenjaku watched carefully. This was the most dangerous state. Not tyrant. Not protector. Variable. The first schism hit Jujutsu high within days. A senior sorcerer refused a mission. I won't clean up after Gojo's unpredictability, she said. Another stepped forward. I won't wait for permission to save people. Voices rose. Lines were drawn. The school split. Not physically. Ideologically. Some believed Gojo should be stopped. Others believed he should be freed completely. Very few believed he should exist at all. The world mirrored that divide. A large curse outbreak erupted in a financial district. High value. High visibility. Authorities delayed evacuation, expecting Gojo. Gojo didn't come. Local sorcerers fought. Civilians fled. Casualties mounted. At the last possible moment, Gojo appeared. He erased the curse. Then he erased the barriers. Every control structure in the area collapsed. What did you do? A sorcerer shouted. Gojo looked at the city. I removed interference, he said. The aftermath was chaotic. Cursed energy surged. Independent manifestations flared and died. For 10 minutes, the city was raw, unfiltered. Then it stabilized. No follow-up disasters. No cascading collapse. Kenjaku's smile faltered for the first time. That shouldn't have worked, he whispered. Gojo didn't wait for praise. He didn't wait for condemnation. He left. Governments responded with force, not military. Narrative. They framed Gojo's actions as reckless, irresponsible, unstable. But something unexpected happened. Local sorcerers reported something strange. Curses weren't clustering as aggressively. Fear spikes dissipated faster. Communities acted sooner. Without centralized control, people adapted. Yuji saw it firsthand. A small town handled a curse outbreak alone. Not perfectly, but decisively. No waiting, no paralysis. This is what you wanted, Yuji said later. Gojo shook his head. No, he replied. This is what they were always capable of. Kenjaku adjusted again, now visibly frustrated. You're letting the system breathe, he said. Gojo met his gaze. You wanted balance, Gojo replied. This is what it costs. Kenjaku's eyes sharpened. No, he said. This isn't balance. A pause. This is erosion. The next move came from Jujutsu headquarters. An arrest order. Not public. Internal. Gojo Satoru was to be detained. Not imprisoned. Safely contained. They sent sorcerers. Not to fight. To delay. Gojo felt them coming. He didn't stop them. When they arrived, he stood calmly. You don't have the authority, one said. Gojo smiled faintly. Neither do you. They activated restraints. Barriers. Seals. They failed. Not violently. Politely. Gojo stepped through them like fog. And stopped. I won't fight you, he said quietly. But I won't let you cage me either. Some sorcerers lowered their weapons. Others didn't. That was the moment everyone realized. There was no returning to the old order. Gojo wasn't a pillar anymore. He was a boundary condition. Kenjaku watched the fracture widen. Good, he whispered. Now the collapse can begin. Because when authority loses control of its strongest asset, it doesn't negotiate, it escalates. And the world was about to learn what escalation looks like. When the target is Gojo Satoru. They didn't come with soldiers. They came with sorcerers who believed they were right. The strike team was assembled quietly. No public order. No announcement. Just sealed messages sent to elite units across the country. Their objective wasn't Gojo's defeat. It was containment by legitimacy. When they arrived, Gojo was waiting. Standing on an empty street at dawn. Hands in his pockets. Yuji stood behind him. So this is it, Yuji muttered. Gojo nodded. They think force backed by belief will work. The leader stepped forward. A veteran sorcerer. Respected. Feared. Gojo Satoru, he said. By authority of Jujutsu headquarters, you are ordered to stand down. Gojo tilted his head. And if I don't? The sorcerer hesitated. Then we will stop you. Gojo smiled faintly. I hope you believe that. They attacked together. Not recklessly. Perfect coordination. Barrier layers activated simultaneously. Binding vows stacked. Space compressed. It would have crushed any other sorcerer instantly. Gojo didn't move. Infinity held. Effortlessly. Silently. The sorcerers pushed harder. Veins strained. Teeth clenched. Cursed energy burned through their reserves. Gojo sighed. This is why I didn't want this. He stepped forward. One step. The pressure vanished. Not broken. Invalidated. Several sorcerers collapsed. Not unconscious. Exhausted. The leader remained standing. Sweating. You're proving our point, he said through clenched teeth. No one should have this power. Gojo met his eyes. Power didn't do this, he replied. Fear did. Behind them, Yuji clenched his fists. You're fighting the wrong enemy, he shouted. There are curses everywhere. The leader didn't turn. This is the enemy now, he said. That sentence hurt more than any attack. Gojo closed his eyes. For a moment, the city felt unbearably quiet. Listen carefully, Gojo said. I am not your ruler. I am not your shield. And I am not your enemy. He opened his eyes. But if you insist on treating me like one. A pause. I will stop pretending otherwise. The sorcerers froze. Not because he threatened them. Because he stopped asking. Kenjaku felt it from afar. The pressure shift. The line being crossed. Ah, he murmured. Here it is. The leader lowered his stance. This doesn't end today, he said. Gojo nodded. I know. They retreated. Not defeated. Warned. Yuji exhaled shakily. You could have wiped them out. Gojo looked at him. Yes, he said. And then I would have proven them right. That night, Yuji couldn't sleep. He found Gojo standing alone again. You're carrying this alone, Yuji said. Gojo didn't look at him. That's what they need me to do. Yuji shook his head. No, he said. That's what they're forcing you to do. Gojo turned to him. You still with me? He asked quietly. Yuji didn't hesitate. Yeah, he said. But I'm scared. Gojo smiled sadly. Good, he replied. So am I. The next morning, the announcement dropped. A containment initiative. Global cooperation. Unified doctrine. Gojo Satoru was now officially designated a Level 0 uncontainable entity. Not enemy. Not ally. A risk. The public reacted instantly. Fear hardened. Protests grew. Demands escalated. Kenjaku watched it all unfold. Excellent, he whispered. They've given fear a face. Cursed energy surged in response. Not explosive. Focused. Gojo felt it. Fear was no longer abstract. It had direction. This is going to get worse, Yuji said quietly. Gojo nodded. Yes, he replied. Now it has permission. He looked out at the city. Lights flickering. Lives continuing. I wanted to teach them independence, Gojo murmured. A pause. But they chose authority instead. And somewhere deep in the curse ecosystem, something ancient stirred. Not a curse. Not a sorcerer. A counterbalance. Because when the world decides one man is too dangerous to exist, it doesn't stop at labels. It builds weapons. They didn't call it a weapon. That would have sounded hostile. They called it a solution. The proposal surfaced quietly at first. Research divisions, joint task forces, cross-disciplinary innovation, every phrase carefully chosen to hide fear. The goal was simple, not to defeat Gojo Satoru, to make him unnecessary. New doctrines emerged, anti-domain technologies, cursed energy dampening fields, collective binding arrays powered by hundreds of synchronized sorcerers. None of it was meant for curses. It was meant for him. Gojo felt the shift immediately. The curse ecosystem reacted differently. Not wary, curious. They're changing the rules, Gojo murmured. Yuji frowned. Can they even do that? Gojo didn't answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. Yes. Given enough fear, humans could rewrite almost anything. The first field test happened in a remote region. A high-grade curse outbreak. Normally trivial for Gojo. This time, a dampening lattice was deployed. The curse struggled, but so did the sorcerers. The lattice worked, partially. Cursed output dropped. Domain formation destabilized, but the cost was immediate. Sorcerers collapsed from feedback. The system demanded constant sacrifice to sustain itself. Gojo arrived late. On purpose. He watched the aftermath silently. Bodies being carried away. Not civilians. Sorcerers. This isn't a replacement, Gojo said quietly. It's a grinder. The lead researcher shook his head. It's independence. Gojo looked at him. No, he replied. It's fear wearing a lab coat. Kenjaku observed the experiment with intense interest. They're doing it, he said softly. They're learning to turn fear into structure. The second test was worse. An urban environment. Civilian presence. A dampening field deployed without full evacuation. The curse weakened, but didn't die. It adapted. Not intelligently. Instinctively. The field collapsed. The curse surged. Dozens died. Gojo arrived immediately. No hesitation. No permission. He erased everything. Curse. Field. Infrastructure. The city block survived. Barely. The backlash was immediate. You destroyed critical research. You undermined progress. You acted unilaterally again. Gojo stood among the ruins. Expression unreadable. You're trying to replace responsibility with machinery, he said. And calling it courage. Yuji watched the argument unfold. You're losing them, he said quietly. Gojo nodded. I know. The next move wasn't scientific. It was political. Yuji was summoned. Not as a student. As leverage. They didn't threaten him. They didn't need to. We know you stand with Gojo, an official said calmly. That makes you influential. Yuji felt the weight instantly. You want me to talk him down. We want you to make him reasonable. Yuji laughed bitterly. You're afraid of him, he said. The official didn't deny it. We're afraid of what happens because of him. That night, Yuji confronted Gojo. They're using me, Yuji said. Gojo didn't look surprised. I expected that. Then why let it happen? Gojo met his eyes. Because if they can't pressure me directly, he said. They'll pressure everyone around me. Yuji swallowed. So what do we do? Gojo looked out at the city again. We let the truth surface. Kenjaku prepared the final maneuver of part 2. This one wasn't aimed at Gojo. Or governments. Or sorcerers. It was aimed at public memory. A narrative was being shaped. Carefully. Relentlessly. Gojo Satoru wasn't being painted as evil. That would provoke resistance. He was being painted as obsolete. Outdated power. Unscalable protection. A relic of emergency thinking. The curse ecosystem responded. Fear shifted. Not toward monsters. Toward instability. Gojo felt it in his bones. The world wasn't asking if he should exist anymore. It was asking, what comes after him? He turned to Yuji. They're preparing for a world without me, he said softly. Yuji's voice shook. Are you going to let them? Gojo closed his eyes. For a long moment. If I fight that future, he said. I become exactly what they fear. A pause. And if I don't? He opened his eyes. Someone else decides it for me. Far away, Kenjaku smiled. Good, he whispered. Now the question isn't power. A pause. It's legacy. The curse network pulsed again. Not violently. Synchronizing. Because part 2 was no longer about whether Gojo Satoru could save the world. It was about whether the world would let him remain part of it. The announcement was made before the crisis began. That was the tell. A global broadcast interrupted regular programming. No panic. No urgency. Just confidence. Today, we unveil a new era of curse response. A system that does not rely on any single individual. Gojo watched the screen silently. Yuji felt his stomach drop. They're replacing you, Yuji said. Gojo nodded. I know. The system was called Aegis. A global network of synchronized barriers, dampening fields, and collective binding arrays. Marketed not as a weapon, but as insurance. And then, right on cue, the crisis began. A multi-node curse manifestation erupted across 3 major cities simultaneously. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly timed. Too perfect. Aegis activated immediately. Fields deployed. Barriers rose. Cameras rolled. At first, it worked. Cursed energy dropped. Public panic stabilized. Anchors praised the system live on air. See, officials said, we don't need him anymore. Gojo stood still. 6 eyes burning. He could see the flaw instantly. Aegis didn't remove fear. It compressed it. The curse adapted. Not intelligently. Inevitably. The fields began to overload. Feedback loops intensified. Sorcerers maintaining the system collapsed one by one. Yuji looked at Gojo. It's going to fail. Gojo nodded. They know. The failure was planned. As Aegis buckled, officials delayed the shutdown. On purpose. They needed proof. Casualties mounted. But the cameras stayed live. When Gojo moved, everything stopped. He appeared above the first city. No authorization. No announcement. He erased the core node. The system screamed as it collapsed. Cursed energy surged, then dissipated. He moved again. Second city. Third. In under a minute, the crisis was over. The world stared, not in awe, in calculation. The broadcast cut back. Officials looked grim. This, one said, is exactly why centralized control is dangerous. Yuji shouted at the screen. They let people die. Gojo didn't respond. The narrative was already set. Headlines rolled in. Aegis shows promise despite interference. Gojo undermines global initiative. Do we still need the strongest? Public opinion split. Not evenly. Decisively. Gojo wasn't feared. He was in the way. That night, Yuji stood in front of cameras for the first time. He hadn't planned to. It just happened. They didn't fail, Yuji said, voice shaking. They were sacrificed. The reporters froze. They knew the system wouldn't hold, Yuji continued. And they let it happen so they could say Gojo was unnecessary. The clip went viral. Instantly. Support surged. Backlash followed. Yuji was labeled emotional, biased, manipulated. Gojo watched the footage alone. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly when Yuji returned. Yuji met his eyes. They were using you, he said. And they were using me too. Gojo smiled faintly. I know. Kenjaku felt the shift. Public sentiment wavered. Not enough. But enough to be dangerous. This ends now, Kenjaku murmured. The final directive came at dawn. Not global. Targeted. Gojo Satoru was to be neutralized. Not captured. Not contained. Removed. The justification was simple. Systemic risk. Jujutsu headquarters fractured completely. Some refused the order. Others accepted it in silence. When Yuji heard, he ran. He found Gojo standing at the edge of the city. Watching the sunrise. They're coming, Yuji said. Gojo nodded. I know. You can win, Yuji insisted. Gojo looked at him gently. That's not the question anymore. Yuji's voice broke. Then what is? Gojo turned. And for the first time since this began. He looked tired. Whether the world learns anything from how this ends, Gojo said. He stepped forward. Not toward battle. Toward exile. I won't fight them, Gojo continued. And I won't let them kill me either. Yuji stared. You're leaving. Gojo nodded. If I stay, he said, I become the excuse forever. Kenjaku watched from the shadows. Eyes wide. That's not supposed to happen, he whispered. Gojo Satoru vanished. Not sealed. Not defeated. Absent. And the world exhaled. Systems took over. Aegis was rebranded. Authority stabilized. Casualties rose quietly. The curse ecosystem shifted again. Not relieved. Unbalanced. Because the strongest didn't fall. He stepped aside. And in doing so, he left the world alone with the consequences of its choices. Yuji stood where Gojo had been. Fists clenched. City sprawling below. They'll regret this, Yuji whispered. Far away, Gojo Satoru stood at the edge of the world. Watching. Waiting. Because part 2 was never about Gojo losing. It was about the world choosing a future that no longer had room for him. The world tried to replace Gojo. And learned how to sacrifice without screaming. In the final part, the strongest disappears. And the system faces itself.